Welcome to the HR Chat Show, one of the world's most downloaded and shared podcasts designed for HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders. For hundreds more episodes and what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.
Welcome to another episode of the HR Chat Show. Hello, listeners. This is your host today, Bill Banham. And joining me on this episode is Jocelyn King, CEO and founder over at VirgilHR, a SaaS solution that empowers HR professionals to make smart, compliant employment and labor law decisions in real time. HR has been the passion and focus of Jocelyn's entire career as she's supported high growth technology startups and public companies throughout her tenure. She defines herself as a true HR generalist and has touched on all aspects of HR in her senior roles. Jocelyn, welcome to the show today. How are you doing?
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for having me. I'm good, thank you.
So let's get into it then, because I've got loads of questions for you today. Firstly, can you tell me about the origin story of VirgilHR and what inspired you and your team to develop an automated compliance solution for HR teams?
Sure. I've been an HR professional my entire career. I started in human resources really straight out of college, worked predominantly for high growth technology companies. And being high growth, we were hiring in a lot of states very quickly. And I was working for actually a UK-based company a few years ago in the tech space, and we were expanding into North America. And it was so hard tracking and complying with employment and labor laws, particularly at the state and local level here in the US. And so we were going on Google and we're Googling what are the maternity leave requirements in California, and we go down a rabbit hole for 3 hours, or, what are the termination requirements and final wage requirements in Washington state. And it was really burdensome doing the research on our own. And it left us also feeling a little unsettled that ultimately we were the ones making these decisions and weren't necessarily lawyers. So sometimes we'd speak to lawyers too, but it was expensive and not very sustainable. So having worked in tech most of my career, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of engineering leaders and have worked alongside them on performance management and talent development of their own engineering workforce, and had a pretty good understanding of the way things worked, and decided, after a few iterations of being in a role where I was experiencing the same problem over and over again, to quit my job about 3 years ago and start VirgilHR for HR.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the HR Chat Podcast. If you enjoy the audio content we produce, you'll love our articles on the HR Gazette. Learn more at hrgazette.com. And now, back to the show.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. So what unique challenges, Jocelyn, do HR pros face when it comes to staying compliant with employment and labor laws? And how does VirgilHR address those issues differently from traditional methods? What set you guys apart from others out there?
Yeah, so the unique challenges here in the US in particular, because that's what we're focused on today, is that these laws are changing all the time, and there are thousands of them, and you have to follow federal law, and you have to follow state law, and you have to follow city law and county law, and they supersede each other. So county law might give an employee greater benefits than a federal law does. So you have to know which laws to follow, and it's very complicated. Nobody knows all of them. And to expect an HR professional to be a legal professional in that situation really isn't very fair. And so it creates a lot of stress, a lot of time that goes into it as well. And that time really takes away from being able to focus on other strategic areas of the business. So where we come in is, unlike other incumbents out there that might offer more of like a content library for you to research, we actually use software to eliminate the need for you to have to do any research. So if you have that employee in California who's requested maternity leave, rather than going on Google or going into a content library and trying to research what laws apply, our software will directly analyze what federal, state, and local employment and labor laws apply to that specific employee. And since we've identified what laws are applicable, we can then give you very prescriptive step-by-step legal guidance on everything you need to do as HR to be compliant, all the forms, all the notices, the third-party state agencies you have to refer an employee to. That takes a tremendous amount of research, and that's something that we do in a matter of a minute or two for you.
Okay, so a quick follow-up to that one, I guess, is how? What I mean by that is, with the thousands of federal, state, and local laws constantly evolving, how does VirgilHR ensure that its platform remains up to date and accurate in real time? Tell us a bit more about what's happening under the bonnet.
Yeah, so it's a mixture of technology and people, really. So we have a legal team internally that uses different types of technologies and databases, and will even go out and make calls to local legislators to ask questions to ensure that our database is not only fully compliant, but that as these laws are changing, which we've talked about are changing all the time, that we are consistently reviewing on a day-to-day basis those changes and making the necessary changes in our system so that the output is reflected appropriately to our customers.
Any big compliance related changes that folks can expect over the next 3 to 6 months? Anything you want to flag there?
Yes, we have a variety of laws that are going to be going into effect in January. We're actually doing a webinar in December to talk all about these 2025 legislative changes that are occurring. Illinois has been incredibly active. They have their new job pay transparency bill that passed that goes into effect January 1st. Washington State has made some amendments to their paid sick leave law. Oregon's made changes to their Paid Family Leave Act. And a reminder that the Department of Labor has increased again its salary threshold for white collar exemptions. That second level now hits in January. So for those who might be impacted, you would definitely want to take a look at that. New York passes paid prenatal personal leave. Connecticut expands their paid sick leave law. So a lot of changes occurring, particularly in the leave law realm or the wage and hour. Those seem to be the two most active areas, and I think that we'll see more and more of that over time.
Okay, so helping you guys deliver all of your core services is your very clever chat bot, of course. In 90 seconds or less, can you talk about how VirgilHR's chatbot works?
Sure. So it works in two different ways. We have a web-based application where you can log into our site and use our chatbot there directly, or we integrate into HRISs like your HRIS of the world that you can imagine that you're using on a day-to-day basis. Our chatbot will ask diagnostic questions about a scenario you're working on. So let's say it's an integration. Our chatbot is silently following you, the HR user, around. And as you're about to make a decision that has a legal consequence like a termination or a pay change or a leave request, our chatbot pops up. It pulls data about the employee from the system, analyzes what federal, state, and local employment and labor laws apply to that employee, and then provides the prescriptive guidance to the user. So it's very proactive. It's more kind of on autopilot rather than that traditional reactive approach to compliance. You don't even have to know a law exists. Our chatbot is there to tell you.
Does your chatbot have a name? Often companies like to give these things names.
We did think about that, actually. We thought about personalizing the chatbot and decided, our company is named after a person anyway. So we'll just keep everything as Virgil. We named the company after Virgil, the poet, because in Dante's Divine Comedies, if you've ever read maybe Dante's Inferno, Virgil is this he's a real life person, but he's a character in the poem who's this guide and this beacon of wisdom and reason, and kind of walks Dante through hell into purgatory up to heaven. And we kind of saw that as a really funny way of being able to guide HR through some of these compliance nightmares that they go through.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. One key area for compliance is leave management and wage and hour laws, of course. I'm going to shorten it. In 1 minute or less, how does VirgilHR support HR teams in navigating those complex areas?
We do it in a number of ways, but if we were to just focus on the chatbot for a minute, again, this example, let's say that you're reviewing this maternity leave request in California. our chatbot is automatically analyzing what laws apply and telling you what you need to do real time. So you don't have to do any of that research, for example. But there are other things that we do as well. Like, for example, we have an employee and worker classification audit tool to help you determine whether a role should be exempt or non-exempt, or an employee versus a contractor. And we cover not just federal guidelines, but state guidelines as well to help you stay compliant with those classification requirements too. Plenty of other areas of wage and hour that we cover, meal and rest break, overtime, payroll frequency, terminations, final wages. The chatbot can help with all of that. We do have other parts of our tool as well, like our multi-state comparison tool, that's also super helpful to our users.
Okay, thank you very much. So as part of my homework, I was all over your website ahead of this call. You've got some pretty startling stats on there. So for example, 1 in 10 employers is sued every year by their employees, and US employers spend over $14 billion a year on outside legal counsel. That's staggering. How does VirgilHR's solution reduce risk and liability for organizations, and what kind of feedback have you received from clients regarding reduced legal costs or avoided settlements?
Sure. Yeah. So it is pretty staggering, actually, how often employers are getting sued. And it doesn't really matter the size of your company either, right? The average settlement award is $250,000. That puts some small companies out of business altogether. So it's really impactful. And so what we're doing is we are helping you as an HR professional, or even as a business owner, mitigate risk and liability by helping you do the right thing the first time around, and helping to identify laws that are applicable to day-to-day situations you're working on that you might not even be aware of. Because again, nobody can be an expert at all of this. It's just too much. So what we've seen from our customers is here's a perfect example. Rather than going to an attorney and having them build out an entire employee handbook for their organization, they're using our employee handbook builder and saving several thousands of dollars, if not more, each year by leveraging our employee handbook builder. By taking advantage of our chatbot and the proactive compliance advice that it provides, they are reducing their risk in doing the wrong thing. In one case in particular, we had somebody who was misclassifying employees. They identified it when they were going through our audit tool and reclassified appropriately and made the necessary changes to make up for it, essentially. That is something that could have put them out of business if they hadn't figured this is one person filing a claim and then kind of that jar of worms opening from there. So we're seeing a lot of avoided lawsuits. That's a little harder to measure, as you can imagine. Instead, what we're taking a look at is, how are you getting sued before, and how are you getting sued now? And is there too? And yes, there is, and that's really exciting. And that cuts down in a lot of areas. It cuts down in legal costs and settlement awards and insurance costs, but also cuts down in time, because HR has to spend a ton of time on those lawsuits, and it takes away from being able to do many other impactful things within your organization. So we're seeing really the reward across the board for our customers, which is really exciting. It isn't just mitigating risk. It isn't just controlling costs. It isn't just improving employer brand or retaining employer brand. It's also giving HR that freedom to do a little more movement than they previously could before in their role.
Data privacy, Jocelyn, is a big concern for lots of companies, of course. So for those companies worried about data privacy and security, how does your team and your tech manage sensitive information while providing that real-time compliance guidance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are a few things that we do. Of course, there are things on the back end that we're doing to remain compliant in the different types of data privacy requirements that we have to meet as an organization here in the US. But we're also anonymizing all the data. So we don't collect employee names, for example. We don't store that data either. So we're, as a compliance company, we're very careful about risk, and the data privacy side of things is an area that we're extremely conscientious of. So going through the right audits is really important as a SaaS provider that is in some way collecting personal and private information. but we're also very clear about the type of information we are storing and the type of information that we're gathering to ensure that everything is done safely.
Jocelyn, so far you've got all the right answers. Well done. You've been being very compliant with your answers, Jocelyn. Say, what advice would you give to HR leaders? Someone who's been an HR pro and now you're on the vendor side. What advice would you give to HR leaders who are overwhelmed with compliance challenges? Yeah, if you're having a chit chat with someone and they're like, I don't know where to start, what's the first bit of advice you'd give them?
The first advice that I would give is conducting some type of audit on your compliance practices within your organization. So taking a look at, even basic things. How are you handling worker authorization? How are you handling the documentation of I-9, the storage of I-9? Are you conducting I-9 audits in your workplace? What about classification? Even looking at things like your pay equity practices, for example. Do you have EPLI insurance? Because I've actually been very surprised in my career to have worked with a lot of companies that didn't early on, and that's really critical. So having EPLI insurance is really important. Do you have a handbook? How often are you reviewing your handbook? How often is it updated? Or is it getting acknowledged by employees? There's so many things that you can take a look at and figure out, where's the low-hanging fruit, things that I can improve very quickly. And get a good bang for my buck, so to speak. But then where are other areas in my business that I really need to spend more time to clean up? And it might be that technology in this case could be a really helpful solution for you, in which case I'd encourage you to take a look at any type of technology provider out there, including VirgilHR, that could assist with those types of compliance needs, and figuring out where compliance sits in your overall HR strategy. And making sure that it does sit within your HR strategy, because it shockingly gets overlooked a lot of the time.
Jocelyn, you're going to be sad when I tell you we are almost at the end of this particular conversation already. What, Bill? I could do this all day. Just a couple more questions for you before we do wrap up. You and I, we spoke at HR Tech as we record this 6 or 7 weeks ago, I guess now. That's a great event. It was ironically, given that the HR Chat Show is top 3 HR tech podcast in the world based on downloads and whatnot. It was my first time at HR Tech in Vegas, but it will not be my last. I had a wonderful time. Beyond HR Tech, what other events that you guys like to attend or exhibit? Where can we expect to see you in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be at Transform in 2025 in March. We love that event. It's a phenomenal event, incredibly progressive and forward-thinking tracks that they talk about. So I really appreciate that conference quite a bit and would expect that any HR professional would. It's excellent. We'll also be at SHRM next year as well. And we always go to HR Tech. We love HR Tech, so we'll be there too. We like going to some regional events. We haven't decided yet where we'll be at in 2025, but those 3 for sure will be attending, and hopefully we have an opportunity to meet as many people as possible while we're there.
That's very interesting. You mentioned Transform. About an hour ago, I interviewed Enrique Rubio, who heads up the Transform community, and he's setting up chapters all around the world.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's a wonderful organization.
It's a great organization, and Enrique is exactly the right guy for that, considering what he did with Hacking HR. He was telling me on that interview that the Hacking HR community is at over 2 million professionals, which is just staggering. Jocelyn, before we wrap up for today, how can we connect with you? If that's LinkedIn, email, I bet you're super cool and all over TikTok and Instagram and places. And of course, how can folks learn more about VirgilHR?
Absolutely. Check us out at virgilhr.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And if you are super curious and you want to reach out and learn more, feel free to email me at jking@virgilhr.com.
Excellent. Well, that just leaves me to say for today, thank you very much for being my guest.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Bill.
Thanks for listening to the HR Chat Show. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe and listen to some of the hundreds of episodes published by HR Gazette? And remember, for what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.